Could Russia really invade Kazakhstan? On the surface, it might seem unlikely. After all, the two countries are allies. However, there are signs of unease. While it's been careful not to antagonise Moscow, Kazakhstan has been building its ties with other powers. Meanwhile, reports suggest that it's also been preparing its defences. So, what exactly is going on? Is this just contingency planning in an increasingly dangerous world, or does Kazakhstan face a genuine threat from its northern neighbour? Hello and welcome, I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. Relationships between neighbouring countries are rarely straightforward, especially where there's a significant power imbalance. While the stronger state may believe that it has a right to exert influence, the smaller side will often try to cooperate and avoid provocation. However, behind the scenes, it may quietly seek to reduce its dependence and bolster its security, especially if the larger state is becoming increasingly aggressive. The problem is that this can also pose risks. If this distancing is then seen as a hostile act, it can create a vicious circle of insecurity. All this is potentially the problem now facing Kazakhstan. Since independence, its foreign policy has been built around close relations with Russia. However, this balancing act has become increasingly difficult to manage following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But as Kazakhstan tries to increase its autonomy, could it be putting itself at even greater risk? The Republic of Kazakhstan is the 9th largest country in the world. Stretching from the Caspian Sea in the west to China in the east, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan lie to its south. To its north, it shares a 7,500 kilometre or 4.7 thousand mile border with Russia, making it the longest continuous land boundary in the world. Crucially, the terrain is largely flat steppe with few natural defensive barriers. The population currently stands at just over 20 million. Here again, Russia is an important factor. While the majority are ethnic Kazakhs speaking a Turkic language, around 15 to 18% of the population are ethnically Russian, concentrated particularly in the northern regions near the border. Meanwhile, Russian has official standing in state institutions and is widely used in public life, media and business. In addition to all this, Kazakhstan retains close economic ties to neighbouring Russia. Much of its oil exports have traditionally moved through Russia, and transport links remain heavily integrated. While Kazakhstan has a long history, for the past 300 years it's been closely linked to Russia. Starting in the 18th century, it was gradually incorporated into the Russian Empire, and following the Russian Revolution, it became part of the new Soviet Union and was granted full republic status in 1936. This all brought about huge changes. As Kazakhstan shifted to collective farming and industrialisation, famine and Russian settlement reduced the native Kazakhs to a minority for many decades. However, everything would change with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, when suddenly Kazakhstan became an independent state. Under its first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who ruled until 2019, it faced several major challenges. As well as building national institutions in a highly diverse society with a considerable Russian presence, it faced the question of how to navigate an entirely new relationship with Moscow. Although Kazakhstan chose to join the Commonwealth of Independent States, a loose organisation linking most of the former Soviet republics, as well as the Collective Security Treaty Organisation, a Russian-led military alliance, Astana and Moscow faced a series of issues throughout the 1990s. As well as questions over the borders, the Russian minority and economic relations, they also had to negotiate the transfer of military assets, including Soviet nuclear weapons stationed in the country. Ultimately, however, neither side wanted a confrontation, and the issues were eventually resolved. Following on from this, Vladimir Putin's rise to power marked a significant step forward. In addition to becoming a key partner in Russia's efforts to promote regional integration, the Kazakh leader enjoyed an exceptionally good relationship with his Russian counterpart. But despite these strong ties, Kazakhstan was careful not to rely solely on Moscow. While it maintained close economic and political links to Russia, it also welcomed Chinese investment, particularly in infrastructure and energy, and fostered strong relations with Western energy companies. It also bolstered its ties with Turkey and the other Turkic-speaking nations of Central Asia. Nevertheless, all this was done extremely carefully. While the country aimed to strengthen its sovereignty by reaching out to new partners, it deliberately avoided provoking Russia, let alone sparking a confrontation. But while the countries had built a strong relationship, things would begin to change when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. While the Kazakh government didn't recognise the Russian decision, it avoided criticising Moscow. But behind the scenes, there were deep concerns about what was happening. The fact that the Russian government had justified its actions on the grounds of protecting Russian speakers made many Kazakhs uncomfortable, given Kazakhstan's large Russian community. Nevertheless, as had always been the case, Astana avoided direct tensions and relations remained stable. However, following on from this, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 put Kazakhstan in an even tighter position. But while there were fears that it could be Russia's next target, the Kazakh government remained determined to avoid any direct tensions with Moscow. Although it reaffirmed its support for the principle of territorial integrity and refused to recognise Russia's annexation of the Ukrainian regions, it refused to adopt Western sanctions imposed on Russia. Indeed, trade between the two countries in fact increased. Since then, the country's president, Kassym-Jomart has continued to engage with Putin. For example, in late 2025, the two countries signed a landmark comprehensive alliance. But while relations between Russia and Kazakhstan appear strong on the surface, there are nevertheless signs that Astana is trying to assert its independence. In addition to publicly stressing Kazakhstan's sovereignty, Tokayev has steadily developed contacts with other countries. For example, as well as attending a landmark summit between the United States and Central Asian republics, he's also been deepening ties with the European Union. All the while, Kazakhstan is also developing the Middle Corridor, a transport route linking China to the Caspian Sea that bypasses Russia. But more recently, Kazakhstan has begun taking steps that could directly antagonise Moscow. For example, facing mounting pressure from the West, it's introduced stricter export rules for Russia, including a ban on certain military-related goods. Meanwhile, reports suggest that it's planning 4 new ammunition factories to manufacture both Soviet-era and NATO artillery shells, a move many see as an important signal of its desire to reduce its defence dependence on Russia. On top of this, a new draft constitution has sparked debate over whether the status of the Russian language is now being subtly reduced. But perhaps most controversially, there have been credible claims that the Defence Ministry has even begun planning for a Russian invasion, a suggestion the government officially denies, saying that the measures aren't in fact aimed at Russia. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing for regular updates on international relations, conflict and security. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. So, if Kazakhstan is really trying to break free from Russia's orbit, could Moscow really respond by invading, as some evidently fear? Militarily, the arguments go both ways. Skeptics argue that opening another vast front would be risky and costly, given that Russia is already heavily engaged in Ukraine. But others take a different view. The border is long and difficult to defend comprehensively, and Russia still has military superiority. That said, invading and occupying are two different things. Kazakhstan is enormous. Any attempt to control substantial territory would require major forces and a long-term commitment. Then again, it might not want to take the whole country. Given its past actions in places like Moldova and Georgia, there's the argument that Moscow may instead just try to seize a part of Kazakhstan, perhaps where the Russians are most numerous. But while it's certainly possible to argue about whether Russia could in fact successfully invade and occupy Kazakhstan, the real question is why would it want to do it? For a start, there are no signs that Kazakhstan is mistreating its Russian community. Indeed, the language changes will still acknowledge the place of Russian, nor is it seeking NATO membership or adopting an openly anti-Russian posture. While it's certainly engaging more with other international actors, it remains formally aligned with Moscow in key institutions. But more to the point, it would be a disastrous move for Moscow in almost every conceivable way, diplomatically, politically, and economically. An invasion would transform a cautious but cooperative neighbour into a deeply hostile foe. And at the same time, it would also alarm other Central Asian countries. In addition, many other states that have been sitting on the fence over Ukraine could then turn against Moscow, seeing aggression against Kazakhstan as wholly unjustified. Crucially, an invasion could also fundamentally destabilise Moscow's relations with China, which has extensive investments in Kazakhstan. All this could then translate into severe financial consequences. Further sanctions would almost certainly follow, putting Russia into an even more precarious position. Of course, none of this makes future tensions impossible. The relationship may well deteriorate. But when one weighs the military feasibility of an attack against the economic, political and diplomatic costs, the case for a Russian invasion all but disappears. In this sense, and for now, the idea of an invasion seems more a reflection of broader regional anxieties than any immediate threat. That said, given all that's happened in Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, it would be irresponsible for Kazakhstan not to consider worst-case scenarios. Ultimately, it has to balance its interests and preserve its sovereignty in the shadow of a major neighbouring state whose behaviour has steadily become less predictable. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.